Welcome to Carolina One Video Training Series. In this session, we will be looking at sections 6 and 7 of the Agreement to Buy and Sell Residential Real Estate. Section 6 of our Agreement to Buy and Sell Real Estate centers on transaction costs, or what are more commonly referred to as closing costs. In this first paragraph, you have defined for you the items that make up the closing cost to the buyer, as well as the closing costs to the seller. Unless indicated differently below, it is assumed that the buyer will pay their own transaction costs and the seller will pay their own transaction costs. If there's some adjustments that need to be made to that, then those need to be outlined in the areas below. So let's kind of drop down and look at some of these. First of all, let's move you to this paragraph here. This paragraph basically says that at closing, the seller will pay buyer's transaction costs not to exceed a certain amount or a certain percentage of the purchase price. So if you're writing an offer and the buyer wishes the seller to pay part or some or all of their closing costs, then this is the paragraph where you will record the amount that the buyer wishes the seller to pay. And you can record that amount in one of two ways. Either record it as an actual number or as a percentage of the purchase price. Of course, we recommend that you've already sat down with the lender for the buyer and you have an idea of what those closing costs are going to include so that you'll have an idea of an amount that you need to ask for. We also recommend that you use a number rather than a percentage for the simple cause of making it easier as well as less confusing, as there's no math that needs to be put into play. So again, this is where you would list that amount. It does go ahead and include in the concept about a non-allowable cost as well as allowable cost, and again, that'll come up depending on the type of loan that you are initiating. The buyer is responsible for any costs that exceed the amounts listed here. So this paragraph, of course, is for closing costs and if the seller is going to pay some of those for the buyer. Now let's move up above here. This little blank deals with some of those extra fees that are oftentimes associated with closing a home in a particular neighborhood. And basically what you have to do is determine who's going to be responsible for those differing fees, whether it's going to be a seller's transaction cost or a buyer's transaction cost. And of course, this is a negotiable item as well. Item number 7 deals with financing, and again, we strongly recommend that you have met with the lender who is going to be working with the buyer so that you have an idea of how to fill this section out accurately. First of all, you have to check whether or not the contract is contingent or not contingent upon financing. And then there's a section for you to stipulate the type of loan that the buyer will be obtaining, whether it's a 30-year loan, a 15-year, or some other type of loan. Also moving along, you get to write in the amount, minimum amount that the buyer will be borrowing, the minimum from the purchase price or the appraised value. So for example, if they're doing a conventional loan with 20% down, then they're getting the minimum amount here would be 80% of the purchase price or appraised value. Notice in the middle of this section, a very important phrase: financing contingency expires at closing. So that means that the buyer has up until the actual closing date identified previously to make sure that they have obtained approval for purchasing that property. Again, the buyer is supposed to make good efforts to apply for and obtain their financing, and if the buyer runs into any issues or concern, they should notify the seller and brokers of those issues. In this section, the buyer shall apply for financing within blank business days from the effective date. And then as you move on to the next page, they have to provide satisfactory written loan approval that contains no credit income or asset conditions within blank business days. Again, a communication with your lender will be of some help here. What we typically find is 5 business days for the application, and really you can do that sooner, or probably should have already done that before you actually sat down and wrote this offer. But 5 business days, and then 15 business days from the effective date for loan approval. And again, note the loan approval is not final loan approval. It's just loan approval that contains no credit, income, or asset conditions. If the buyer is unable to obtain financing, notice here, either party may terminate the contract by notice, and the earnest money shall be returned to the buyer. So just pay careful attention to that. Here is where you would indicate the name of the lender, the type of the loan that the buyer is going to proceed with, and if it's an FHA or VA type loan, then there's the proper addendum attached. So that covers section 6 and 7, dealing with closing costs and financing, and we'll look at the other sections in our upcoming webinars.